I'm Amanda Leitner, and welcome to Rochester Rising, where we amplify the stories of Rochester entrepreneurs. Welcome to episode 239 of the podcast. Thank you so much for deciding to spend some of your time with us today to learn more about small businesses and the culture of entrepreneurship within Rochester, Minnesota. We hope that you learned something today from entrepreneurs themselves that can help you with your own business journey. We release a podcast each Wednesday here at Rochester Rising. You can find all of our podcasts on our website at rochesterrising.org or wherever you like to listen into your podcasts, including on YouTube. So we have a playlist dedicated to all of our podcasts as well on our YouTube channel, so you can check it out there if you are a YouTube fan. We also have tons of articles and videos that we've created over the years telling the stories of both new and very experienced business owners. You can find all of that content on our web. Rochester Rising is part of Collider, which is a Rochester, Minnesota-based nonprofit that activates, connects, and empowers early-stage entrepreneurs in this community. You can learn more about Collider and how this organization can help accelerate and assist your entrepreneurial journey at collider.mn. We launched this podcast and Rochester Rising in 2016 to tell stories of entrepreneurship taking place within the city of Rochester, Minnesota, especially stories that otherwise would not have been told. We take a lot of time to understand each entrepreneur and what their experience has been like in this community. If you find value in this podcast, if you find that you learn something each time you listen in, please consider donating if you can to our tip jar so we can keep telling these stories for this community. We use the local business for giving for our fundraising efforts. You can donate one time to our tip jar. You can do a recurring donation. Any little bit helps keep this podcast going. If you are listening into the podcast through our website or connecting through there, you can find the donate button right in the show notes. Otherwise, if you are listening in on your favorite podcast catcher, you can find our tip jar and more information about how to donate in the link in our show notes. So check it out. We would greatly, greatly appreciate any donation if you can to allow us to keep telling these stories. This week is the final podcast in our Summertime Rewind series before we get back to brand new interviews. Today on the show, we go all the way back to podcast episode 64, which originally aired on December 13th, 2017, with Dr. Victor Montori, a professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic. When we spoke for this podcast, Dr. Montori had recently self-published his very first book called The Patient Revolution for Careful and Kind Care, Why We Revolt. This manifesto calls for a fundamental change in today's global healthcare system, advocating for patient care that's kind, careful, and based on love. Dr. Montori has a deep interest in patient-centered care, working to better understand how to deliver care without disrupting the lives of his patients. On the podcast today, we talk about his work with the Patient Revolution, an organization that promotes a fundamental change in the way that patient care today is delivered, and much more. Before we launch into today's podcast, we just want to acknowledge our sponsor, Clifton Larson Allen, or CLA. The team at CLA would love to get to know you, learn more about your vision, and see if they can help. CLA is a full-service CPA firm with over 100 offices nationally, including right here in Rochester. Sure, they do taxes and audits, but they also focus on helping startups refine their vision, build budgets, work with banks and investors, and track and organize their accounting. They are deeply experienced at building the business systems that allow you to focus on what you do best: get product market fit, grow sales, hire talent, and create a thriving enterprise. Contact Todd Churchill at todd.churchill@claconnect.com or give them a call at 507-280-2317. All right, so now on to the podcast with Dr. Victor Montori and the Patient Revolution. All right, so I am here with Dr. Victor Montori today to talk about a variety of things, I'm sure. So I'll just give a brief introduction to yourself because you wear many different hats. Professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic, endocrinologist and health science researcher who's authored over 550 peer-reviewed publications. Also the director of late-stage translational research at the Mayo Clinic Center for Clinical and Translational Science and the lead in the Knowledge and Encounter Research Center at Mayo Clinic to advanced person-centered care for patients with diabetes and other chronic conditions. And Dr. Montori is also the chairman of the board of the Patient Revolution and has recently self-published his first book, which is what we're here to talk about today. So many different hats.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here today. I wanted to talk first in kind of the start of your journey. So you're from Peru, from Lima. So what was your kind of journey like to get to Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and what did that kind of look like?
Yeah, well, so I came here for training in internal medicine. The process is usually a lottery where after interviewing in hospitals, the hospitals put names of the people they would like to see train in their hospitals, and the applicants put in the hospitals they would like to potentially train in, and then there's a matching program that actually connects the two. So from Peru, I finished medical school there, and I applied to 70 different places, and by I think incredibly good fortune, I was among the last people that made that match to Mayo. That was in 1995. I started here in 96, and have essentially been at Mayo training in internal medicine and endocrinology, and now as a diabetes doctor, developing a career not only in clinical medicine, taking care of patients, but also in research. I only had a 2-year parenthesis where I was shipped off to Canada, and I had the opportunity to work in Hamilton, Ontario. And then when I came back at Mayo in 2004, joined the staff at the Mayo Clinic.
Excellent. So been in the U.S. for a long time at this point.
Yeah.
I was kind of interested in how you kind of first got interested in this concept of patient-centered care and kind of why you saw a need for this in today's healthcare system.
Yeah, it's obviously every time somebody asks a question like that, one has to make up an explanation because these things happen to you. You don't necessarily consciously wake up one day and go, I'm going to go into patient-centered care, right? I think it just it may have been the personal health issues, encounters with healthcare with family members, and of course in the care of patients. As a clinician that sees patients with diabetes, one of the specific challenges that I help patients with is weaving the challenges of their care into the fabric of their daily lives, because this is not a condition that you can turn on or off, or that can quit for a while so you live your life. You have to adapt to it and live your life with it. You don't necessarily cure it. You don't get over it. To understand how those treatments work without interrupting people's lives require that at least some curiosity as to what those lives look like, and an opportunity to get to know people better, understand what makes them tick, and then using that information, help them tailor the program of care so that they can not only take care of themselves, but also live their lives unhindered by their disease, but also by their treatment.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like the hot word now of individualized care, but it's actually taking the time to sit down with the patient and understand what's of value to them and what makes the most sense in their situation.
Yeah, I think making sense in their situation is the critical statement. A lot of the individualized medicine effort at the moment has to do with individualizing treatments to the biology of the patient. And I think, particularly in chronic conditions, but I think in general, the most important task, not to diminish the importance of making the individualization to the biology, because that's been critical for a few conditions actually. It's the individualization to the biography of people and understanding their context and understanding how they're going to be patients while they are also parents, volunteers, teachers, workers, innovators.
Right, because life has to go on, right?
Well, I always tell this joke when I give my talks, which is that I have these 3 boys, and I ask them, what are you gonna do when you grow up? And none of them have ever told me they want to be great patients, right? So people have other goals, they have other aspirations, and health issues happen to them. And so our job is to make sure that those health issues don't interrupt their quest, whatever that quest is, that they don't interrupt the drama of their life, that they fall in love and they get disappointments and they achieve their dreams and they have success and failure and everything with health and healthcare issues safely in the background, not playing in the foreground of the drama of their life, but just in the back, as much as we can in the background of those lives.
So I wanted to talk to you about the Patient Revolution, this kind of organization that you have. I think it started about 1.5 years ago. Is that right? So do you want to talk a little bit about that and kind of the vision and what you're trying to accomplish with the organization?
Yeah. So it's an interesting story because it's a nice confluence of two independent efforts. On the one hand, Dr. Warburton from Ohio was a clinician beloved by his patients who was very focused on educating and helping his patients get the most out of their healthcare visits. And he developed a number of simple things, simple interventions that encourage patients to get the most out of their care. He had, for instance, a little postcard showing a dog with bunny ears as a way of reminding his patients to bring another person to the encounter so they can serve as an extra pair of ears so that they can pay attention to what was going on in the discussion. Or encouraged... had a tongue depressor with a stop sign sort of stuck to it, and this was a way of empowering patients to interrupt clinicians if they were going too fast or using too much jargon. His son, Phil Warburton, started a foundation to honor his father's efforts and memory and to continue his mission. And then as the foundation mature in its mission, he wanted to partner with a large healthcare organization, and that brought him to Mayo. And in his search for the right partner, we bump into each other. And going beyond the interventions that Dr. Warburton was developing at the time, we looked at what we were doing for about a decade in terms of helping patients and clinicians work together to come up with treatments, what is sometimes called shared decision-making. And connecting the two dots, we came up with the idea that we could potentially change healthcare towards creating conversations everywhere.
Absolutely. I know you talk about conversations in your book a little bit more, so maybe we'll just dive into that. So you recently, just a month ago really, self-published your book, A Patient Revolution for Careful and Kind Care, Why We Revolt. So why write the book? Like, why did you think that was an effective way to kind of spread this message?
Yeah, the book proposal, I wrote it in 2013. So this book comes out 4 years after that initial idea. And at the time, in 2013, I just thought there was an opportunity to put down in writing what had been about 10 years of work that we had done in our research group. And as I tried to write it, what kept coming up was not a summary of the research that we had done, but rather were a series of statements, a series of declarations of something bigger, that the need for a fundamental change in the way healthcare is inflicted on people. And by that I mean on clinicians at the front line and also on patients. Language of the right to health, language of solidarity, healthcare for all, kept coming up in the writing, and I kept putting it aside because that's not what I wanted to write. And I guess I gave up resisting it, and I decided to embrace what would try to come out. And as it did, it became very clear that inspiring those 10 years of work and this association with the Warburtons and this idea of a patient revolution organization was a core set of values and a vision for a healthcare that, instead of being based on competition and industrial values and greed, it was based on collaboration and solidarity and conversations at the one-to-one between the patient and the doctor, but also between the citizens and the healthcare organizations that serve them, and at the national level between policymakers and citizens. And so this idea of a democratic involvement in what care should be all these ideas were coming up and they just had to be put down somewhere. So the book essentially had to be written, and I just served as its conduit.
Right. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the concepts in the book, which I just finished reading. So thank you very much for letting me take a deeper dive into this topic, which I'm not, involved with all that often. But yeah, so basically you're calling for, like you said, a complete change in what you call industrial healthcare and real patient revolution to change that. So in the first part of the book, you kind of lay out the issues, which is kind of cruelty, blur, greed, and burden. So yeah, if you want to talk a little bit about that, but I think we've all kind of experienced it, like blur, like you not feeling like your clinician sees you, cruelty, burden of just like what the healthcare system requires you to do to treat your disease sometimes is more, for lack of better words, burdensome or cumbersome than the disease itself. So what issues do you see now in the healthcare system?
Yeah, so as you point out, I mean, cruelty is one that was particularly interesting chapter because it was not, even though it's the first chapter after the introduction in the book, it was not the first one that got written. I discovered cruelty as I was writing about other things in the book. When one reads about cruelty in other areas, one often finds that people tend to be cruel not because they want to be cruel, but because they're in context where being cruel just is the default. It's just the easy thing to do. And I come from Peru, and if you were to go to any customer service oriented or customer service booth or window in a bank or in a state office or whatever, you will see, and I think the same is true in some organizations here, you will see somebody who's not interested in serving you, who is interested, for whom you are a bother. You are interrupting the conversation with their colleague or their joke or whatever. Zootopia, the movie, had a great part with sloths about this, right? And when you're sick, so when you're just going there for some sort of paperwork or whatever, it's just terrible. But when you're sick, it's particularly cruel. And in the book, I go through all the forms of cruelty that I could identify. I'm sure there are more. But for instance, some that are not as obvious are in Peru when I was picking up laboratory samples for my patients. I had to do that myself. I would bring all these tubes filled with blood to the laboratory, and I would drop them there, but they had a sort of like the laboratory Nazis who he'd looked at all the tubes, and if they didn't have the right amount of blood for the tests that were demanded, he would throw them away. And I'm not saying that he looked for the, kind of in the ballpark. It had to be precisely that amount, and then he would just throw it away. Mm-hmm. And without regard of whether maybe the patient from which the blood was drawn had tough veins, for instance, to tap. So he just didn't care about the patient and the suffering or the need for further tests or the delays in the patient's care that would result from not having those results. He just threw it away because he was just doing his job. So many people in healthcare, by just doing their job, are particularly cruel. Now, in the book, I also talk about sort of later in the book about examples of where people really go out of their way to provide careful and kind care. Mm-hmm. And I've been very lucky. I've experienced personally some of that. We were traveling in Germany once, and my son became very sick, and the treatment that he needed was not available in Germany. And so our clinician at Mayo asked the pharmacy to get us the treatment that we needed. But because of time differences and this sort of thing, by the time the remedy was boxed and ready to be shipped, the FedEx truck had already left for the day. So the pharmacist could have easily said, okay, we'll ship it the next day, and with the time difference and everything, it will be another 24 hours before my son will get the first dose of this treatment. What she did instead is she took the medicine with her, took it to the FedEx main office and dropped it there on her own time, mm-hmm. on her own vehicle. I'm sure she violated all sorts of protocols in doing that, but she overcame the fear of that violation to do it on behalf of my son. Right. So that's in the system. But people, in order to be kind like that, they have to get out of the system's rules to be able to do that.
Right. And it's going back to what you would think the majority of people got into healthcare for, is to assist the patient and provide the best care and life for them, really health care for the patient.
Right. And which is a reason, because people, in order to be able to experience the satisfaction of doing that, have to get out of their way to do it. It's very common that people don't have meaning in their work in healthcare anymore, which is almost an oxymoronic, right? And it's one of the most meaningful areas to work in because you help people directly. Mm-hmm. But because of protocols and other things that we have in place, we take that away from people. And so as a result, there's reports of 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 frontline people being burned out working healthcare. So, which is a tragedy because this is some of the best people in our cities that come in dedicated to serve others, and we're burning them out. Right.
And these are very bright people who you want to have their attention to help you as the patient. So, yeah, it's a difficult situation. Then the next part, you talk a little bit about kind of what's happening in the system now that is positive. So, kind of or what is necessary. So, elegance, solidarity, love, integrity. And then you give examples of systems that are working now. For example, healthcare system in Hennepin, where I believe it was the new director or something went out and talked to people that they were serving to see how the clinicians, the healthcare workers in that system could work with the community to provide what they needed, and love, of course. So, having that human connection, like seeing the patient as a person and as a team. Yeah. So, what kind of things were you seeing?
So, for your audience that is focused on entrepreneurship and trying to develop things, elegance is a particularly interesting chapter because elegance is a feature of products and services that is often highlighted in that you've essentially removed all the unnecessary elements. You've created an elegant solution when the solution does not have any extras in it, doesn't have any noise in it. It's just all the good stuff in it, and that's it. And it's simple to the point of being ridiculously simple, mm-hmm. but does the job. And so elegance in healthcare is a bit of the same, which is the idea of ensuring that there is nothing that distracts you from what you do, but in peeling all the stuff out, you find yourself with enough time to, for instance, see the patient in high definition, for instance, to discuss with your colleagues about a difficult case or a difficult situation if you're a clinician, but also to discuss with your colleagues how you feel about a difficult patient, because this is where you get some of that understanding and love and recognition from your colleagues that sort of refuels you to deal with difficult, emotionally difficult or hard, challenging situations that you face with your patients. So elegance means that you don't hurry, that you're not meeting quotas, that you have to see this number of patients and in this number of hours, but that somehow you have a system that has innovated enough in it to not to optimize the extraction of value from all these workers, like in a factory, focused on efficiency, but rather to optimize the wellness of all of those who come in contact with suffering. And it doesn't optimize the efficiency. I say there that the clinic, an efficient clinic, is not one that is cheap, but it's in fact one that is elegant, that is unhurried, that is able to care really, because that's the fundamental mission. You point out the case of Mark Linzer at Hennepin County Medical Center, and what he did there was exactly that. He came into a clinic that was very busy, very noisy. There was also visual noise all over the computer screen. The frames of the screen were filled with Post-its, and there were signs on them, and it was completely chaotic and disorganized. And there were a ton of patients looking for a lot of care all the time. Mm-hmm. And this clinic burned people out all the time, and there was enormous turnover. So nobody belonged in that clinic. People went there for a little bit, and then they went away. So one of the things that he did was he slowed the place down. That, of course, created a backlog of patients early on, but by slowing the place down, he made the place elegant. Nurses and doctors began to have time to talk to each other. That means they were able to work as a team better, and they were able to see their patients in higher definition the first time, which meant that many times they were able to solve the patient's problem or concern the first time, which also reduced the demand for a second or third visit, which in the long run reduce the demand, the pressure on the clinic to see more patients. So that's an example of making the clinic elegant and give the clinicians and the nurses quality of life so that they can actually care for the people that were showing up in that clinic.
Mm-hmm. And with all good manifestos, you have to offer some sort of solution, right? So in the last part, you talk about that. So timelessness, being careful, having conversations and building kind of these cathedrals. And I thought kind of the conversation part was one of the most interesting because including myself, like when I go into the physician, I want to get in and out of there as quickly as possible. And it's like, if something's wrong with me, that shouldn't be what I'm doing. You know, it's sitting down, having a conversation. And like you said in the book, not treating the patient as a patient like them should be treated, but what is going to be effective for that patient. Because it's not just this health situation that's bringing them there. There's also work life, family life, everything that's kind of making the piece of the puzzle for that patient. So, yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that and what kind of your vision is for what potential solutions the healthcare system could work toward?
Yeah, so conversation is an interesting piece. So, when you talk about a revolution, you think, there's going to be, violence, right? There's going to be some disruption, winners and losers sort of thing. And then you say that the main tool of that revolution will be conversations, and then there's something wrong with this, right? Because conversations is usually not the way you defeat your enemy. Conversations is about making peace. But the conversations we talk about here are conversations that can fundamentally change things. So, for instance, if you were to just go to your doctor with chronic belly pain, and your doctor were to examine you, find nothing wrong, then order a test, find nothing wrong, and then give you some pain medication. Well, welcome to the opioid epidemic, right? And perhaps the reason you have belly pain is because you're a victim of sexual abuse, and you just never got that out. It never came out. It was never dealt with, and so now we're dealing with a symptom that is disguised as just pain and managed. So having the conversations may be diagnostically, clinically beneficial. But also, if you come in with again, as I was suggesting, with chronic problem and needing chronic treatment, understanding you better without a home visit, understanding you better might rely on you being a good, to tell me very clearly how your life is and what matters. For that, there needs to be some space for you to do that, and without the pressure of time and the need for efficiencies that are, false efficiencies, because they move us quickly, but we don't really address your problem. But it doesn't stop in the clinical encounter. We think that there are important conversations to be had between cities and their healthcare systems. So, there are places, there are cities in which, for instance, there are 2 clinics, and one of them buys a CT scan. And then the other one buys another CT scan. Now there are 2 CT scanners. And guess what? They cost money. The money needs to be recovered. So now every citizen in that town is at risk of being ordered a CT scan that they don't need just so that they can pay for the machine. So how can that city work with the healthcare providers in their city to try to harmonize the services they provide so they don't have to compete and duplicate and then pass the bill to the city, but rather provide sufficient coverage of all the healthcare that is necessary in that city in a complementary way. And I using the example in the book of Hamilton, Ontario, where all the hospitals, which are operated by different independent private corporations under single payer, but they're all private corporations, got together a few years back and said, okay, you'll be the children's hospital, you'll be the cancer place, you'll be the heart place. And then they move clinicians, machines, and et cetera, so that patients could be seen in the right place without any duplication of service or competition. Competition that in this case will just distract resources from just simply providing care. And then there are conversations that need to occur at the national level. I'm a diabetes doctor. I'm very concerned right now about the price of insulin. Insulin has gone up in price dramatically, even though it was made into a medication in 1922. So there's no real explanation for this except greed. And we need to have ways of actually ensuring that the medications that are most helpful, the highest value medications, are actually either cheap or free to those people who need them. Because it should be incredibly unethical, incredibly problematic for our societies to take away from people life-saving or dramatically life-altering medications just simply because people cannot afford them. That in a country as rich as this, that should not be acceptable at all. To give an illustration of how misguided the situation is at the moment, the most exciting policy thing going on about, for instance, medications today is that if you develop a medication that is a game changer, that is a cure, that is going to be a dramatic improvement, people say, well, that's high value, and the medication should be priced to their value. So if it's high value, you should be able to demand, hundreds of thousands of dollars for it. Can you imagine putting oxygen in your nose, or rehydrating salts for children, or anti-snake venom sera that are life-saving? If they cost hundreds of thousands of dollars because they can save lives, we will have mortality because of poverty, and that will be so unjust and unfair. So we cannot tolerate that. We need to have those conversations to change what people are saying we should be valuing. And those people, of course, are in the position to profit from that, and we should be able to call that out and say, this is not in the patient's best interest, this is not careful and kind care. That's how profound a conversation could be in bringing about a change from industrial healthcare to patient care.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast or reading an article or something, I can't quite remember, a few weeks ago about vaccines. And I think this is like one of the most devastating examples of this, especially in third world countries where you have nonprofits trying to subsidize the cost. And you have doctors on the ground going door to door in some of these countries, and they're already afraid of vaccinations. And then now they can't afford them for their children, or the government or the nonprofit can't, the price is kind of on a sliding scale or something, depending on, the country. And it's really sad that we can't get these life-saving vaccines that we take for granted in the U.S. And I know this is a completely different issue, but, it's these things should not be this expensive.
It's not a completely different issue because it's interesting. So this book, when I wrote it, of course, it's reflective of a 20-year experience in medicine, most of it in the United States. And so I thought it would resonate mostly with people looking at the healthcare system in the United States. In about 15 days, I'm going to receive the proofs of the Spanish translation and Italian translations undergoing. Looking at where it's selling and the comments on Twitter, it's resonating with people in different systems in which the payment system may be different, but the same sort of challenges of how do we deliver care to large numbers of people in an efficient way at low cost remain. And in the effort of doing that, which is, of course, a laudable goal, what happens is a corruption in the mission of healthcare, from caring for people to simply delivering what appears to be a service that in which the clinician at the front line and the patient are interchangeable pieces, and it can all be standardized, and everybody could be able to provide that no problem. And that's not, if you do it that way, it just doesn't work. And so the patient revolution has resonance, not just in the United States.
Yeah, no, that's very true. So it sounds like kind of next steps for this book, getting it out into different translations, getting it out to more people. And I know you're doing some book signings as well in the community. So Cafe Steam on, is it the 10th?
The 18th, yeah.
18th at Cafe Steam. Okay, that's right. In Mall of America, December 10th.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Right. Yeah, so where can people kind of find your book in the community? I know it's on Amazon, but you'll be out shaking hands.
Yeah, so on the 18th at Cafe Steam, there'll be, you could come in and get some signed books. Also, if you go to our website, patientrevolution.org/revolt, you can access the book, and it's available in softcover, in ebook, and in audiobook as well. With my, you have to deal with my accent, and then we also have an online sort of store where if you want to order signed copies, so if you want me to write something for your loved one, I'm happy to do that as well. But I think the main thing is that I would like people to get this book and then share it broadly with friends and colleagues. This is a cultural movement, and the more people can talk about the kinds of conversations that we need to bring about patient care that is careful and kind for all, the better.
Yeah. No, I'm taking mine to my mother after this. I'm giving it to her next week, and I'm sure she will really enjoy it as someone who's been involved in the healthcare system for a long time and kind of experienced a lot of these things. So I'm sure she's going to like this. And I'm sure she'll be listening to this probably at the same time I give her the book. So yeah, I guess the big question is, why is this the right time? Why do you think this is a good time to start this global conversation about a patient revolution? Why is this necessary right now?
Yeah, I think it's necessary right now because we are at a time in humanity, contrary to what it may have appeared, it's been regarded as one of the most peaceful moments in humanity. And moments of peace are moments where humanity could distract itself from killing each other to try to elevate humanity's game, protect the environment, advance the interests of those less fortunate, cure disease, these sort of aspirations, go to Mars, that sort of stuff. And there's some fundamentals, right? And one of those fundamentals is how do we ensure the equal distribution of opportunity? And there are a few things that rob us from opportunity. One of them being illness, and we know that illness is not distributed fairly. And in addition to the unfairness of the genetic lottery, we have the unfairness of the zip code lottery. And where you're born, where you live, determines many of your outcomes. And we have a way of equalizing that opportunity through through public health for the most part, but also through careful and kind care. And to have that opportunity and instead of putting that to good use, corrupting it by greed and other interests, it's a tragedy that affects our generations. And I've woken up at night thinking about my sons. I'm raising them to ask questions. And I don't want them to, well, I sort of want them to, but I don't want them to ask questions when I'm, retired and old. Dad, you were there when this was happening. What did you do to try to make healthcare better, to prevent it from becoming this impersonal, AI-based, rule-based, at your home, don't talk to anyone, loneliness-producing, impersonal, problem-solving, algorithmic nightmare that many innovators are imagining as a potentially good thing. Mm-hmm. I would like the healthcare system to be based on love, and our societies that nurture those healthcare systems to be based on solidarity. Mm-hmm. I don't see that naturally going in that way right now. It requires change. It requires us to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And I want to do what I can. And that book and that organization and the work that we've done with our research are things that I can do, obviously not by myself, but with a large group of people that I wish could become larger and larger. Mm-hmm.
Well, hopefully this is the first step to gain more converts to your message. I think it's fantastic.
I think that one of the things that might illustrate to your audience what this book is about, because every time somebody says, "Oh, I have a book about healthcare," yawn, right? There is a part of the book that, if you let me, I would to read, because I think it highlights the fundamental message here. In the last chapter, which is called Cathedrals, I speak about different kinds of cathedrals. The big ones, the churches that society spent generations building because as if time didn't matter. That's obviously a metaphor for encounters between patients and clinicians. I also talk about sculptures and how they are able to chip away. And I think that, for instance, technology that is built for healthcare needs to be designed to reduce the frictions between humans, mm-hmm. not to interject themselves between them. But the third metaphor that I use is the Castel, which is a human pyramid that is built in Spain in the Catalonia area. And I finished the book with that image of these castells. And what's striking about these castells is that they bring everybody in town, so regardless of ability, and they give them a job in a place in this castell. So everybody contributes to it. And I point out that it is that solidarity of that society that I think is important. And this is the last paragraph of the book, is that the castell is almost finished. The last one, a precious child, is climbing to its top. Most of these castells put their children at the top because they're the lightest ones. They give them helmets. So it's
okay.
Her parents, holding on to their fellow castellers at the base, trusting everyone else, await nervously for the music to signal their daughter's arrival to the summit. They are enveloped by a deep sense of care for and about each other. They are surrounded by love. As she climbs, that little girl will not feel lonely. As she stands at the top, she will not think she got there just because of her own effort and courage. For if she were just to look down, she would see everyone in the village, her whole world, holding her, raising her, helping her touch the moon. And I think that's both a metaphor for the societies that I would love for us to have, for women, for instance, to be able to grow up in, but also for the kinds of success that I would like to see us celebrate, success of our communities of innovators and entrepreneurs, where nobody feels they can do it alone, but we can all do it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think celebration of people as well with different ideas. Like you were saying, perhaps your idea or your message is a little different from what healthcare innovators, with data analytics and things like that are saying right now. And I think there's space for all those conversations to be happening and being accepting of those and listening. So, absolutely. So, my last question for you. What's the reception of the book been like so far as you've been getting this out there and talking to people in the community and leaders in this field?
Yeah, I'm very disappointed because the majority of the feedback that I've received thus far is that they like the book and it's interesting and important. And the reason I'm disappointed is maybe I didn't go far enough.
Second book,
or maybe I should talk to other people that are not related to me. Or maybe people are not taking the message seriously enough. But I really believe in a fundamental change in healthcare, and I would like people to engage with the book in that way. We have invited people to send us their stories because I think that as people read through, they will recognize some of these elements that I described in their own personal history. And I would love it if the next volume of Why We Revolt is Why We Revolt, the Citizen's Voice. And we tell the stories of cruelty and blur and greed from the perspective of the citizens, but also we tell the stories of solidarity and elegance and generosity and careful and kind care of meaningful conversations from those same citizens. So the best response that I expect for the book so far has been great, but the best response I expect for the book is those stories that people send. And actually, we probably have about 20 so far that we've received, and we're beginning to work through to try to understand, put them in a format that we can then share broadly, while protecting, of course, the necessary privacy of those who have decided to share those stories with us. And it's both clinicians and patients who are sending the stories in. So it's very exciting. We hope to have hundreds of these and eventually be able to show those back and point out that it's not just some interesting and nice concept, but it's a lived reality where the problem is absolutely fundamentally real, but the way out, the solutions are also possible and within reach.
Excellent. Well, that was my last question for you. Do you have any final thoughts or words you want to add before we wrap up here, or the best way to get in touch with yourself and the organization in case people have stories they want to share with you?
Yeah, I would love to leave the last word to everyone and to send that last word to us. PatientRevolution.org is where they can find information not only about the book, but also the other activities and content that the Patient Revolution is developing to try to help people, communities, and advocacy organizations in bringing about careful and kind care for all. And you can find me at victor@patientrevolution.org.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I know you're a busy man, so I appreciate your time and coming to share this mission with us.
It's a very generous invitation, and I could not say no. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much to Dr. Victor Montori for sharing his story about the patient revolution. You can learn more about this organization and his book by checking out the links in our show notes. Thank you so much for spending time with us today and tuning into this podcast. If you know an entrepreneur or someone who would benefit from the conversation today, we encourage you to please share this conversation with them. All right, that is a wrap for our podcast and the final episode in our Summertime Rewind series. Thank you so much for turning back time with us to listen into some of your favorite podcasts from the past 5 years at Rochester Rising. If you enjoyed today's podcast, we encourage you to make sure that you rate the podcast so that others can find it and that you are subscribed so that you never miss any of our podcasts. We will be here next Wednesday with a brand new episode.